All right. So today I will be giving a presentation on Diogenes. All right. All right. To start with, let's give some background on who Diogenes was. So starting his life, Diogenes was born in 404 BC. He was a citizen of Sinope. Then he was exiled for reasons I'll get into in a minute. The events of his life are extremely uncertain. Very, very little is known about his death, early events of his life, things that outside of anecdotes didn't exist because that's the only reason he was recorded was for his anecdotes. And then he died in 323 BC. So exile. Either he or his father defaced the currency of Sinope, and it's uncertain which, but one of them did, and either he was exiled or he followed his father into exile. He then relocated to Athens, where he, instead of living in a house, he lived in the actual agora, the main area of Athens, in a wine cask or a bathtub, again, unsure on which it is. And then he may have met Anasthenes. Again, uncertain on whether or not they actually ever met, but because of some dating with coins, they're not sure if they ever met. So Diogenes, some of his practices that he used in his daily life, he lived off of others. He lived off of the donations of others, primarily. The only reason he survived was wine and bread scraps that people of Athens would give him. He also believed in brutal honesty. He thought that if you weren't being honest to someone, you were lying. If you weren't if you're clouding or not giving the whole truth, you were doing them a disservice. So he was brutally honest the whole time. He also didn't believe in privacy. He did urinate and masturbate in public because he figured if this is something you're comfortable doing at home, why is it weird for me to do it in public, which is a controversial take. But he was actually described by Plato as a Socrates gone mad, because of his extreme behaviors and actions towards others. All right, so Diogenes was a philosopher, so let's get into some of his main beliefs and what made him infamous today. So here's a small list of some of the things he believed in. This isn't everything, but I think this is a pretty good list. Self-control, that's pretty self-explanatory. Shamelessness, like I described earlier, urinating and masturbating in public, he said, we're fine because why should I have shame in something that you go and do at home? Cosmopolitanism. That is the belief that all humans should be united and they're all one. All citizens of the world should live without borders. Arete, that's a Greek phrase that describes the belief that all humans should be united and they are all one. And then rejection of the unnecessary. He believed that social status was unnecessary. Material possessions, and for one, cups. He had a cup that he would eat and drink out of, but then he saw a child drinking out of his hands, and he decided, I have no need for this cup, so he threw it away. And then manners, as I said earlier, he would be brutally honest, even to a point of being cruel to anyone. And then his main belief was cynicism. Cynicism he was called one of the original cynics. So cynicism. Diogenes and Antisthenes, who I mentioned earlier, were kind of the main faces of cynicism. The main ideas of cynicism are living in virtue, living for pleasure and striving towards what will bring you pleasure in life and not doing anything that doesn't bring that. No possessions, as I mentioned earlier. He lived in a wine cask or a bathtub, and didn't even have a cup to eat out of. and then also defacing like the customs and the laws of the where he lived, where he like abided in. So here I have a couple stories that really sum up who Diogenes was, because he was known through like allegories and stories about what he did in his philosophies. This is how I think you can get the best picture of what type of person he was. So he would walk around with a lamp in broad daylight and hold it up to people's faces and go and like stare at them, and they would understandably get quite uncomfortable and be like, hey, what are you doing? And then when questioned, he would just tell them, I'm in search of an honest man. I haven't found one yet. Like, let me know, like, if you know one. And that really pushed a lot of the people that he would ask this to think about, well, what am I doing in my life that is not like, which is corrupt, which does like brings others harm. And that was one of his big things about like the honesty, the brutal honesty, like living how you do in private should be the same as how you do in public. And then Plato's human being. So Plato once described a human as a featherless biped, and Diogenes did not like this definition. So he went and procured a chicken and then proceeded to pluck all the feathers off, and then brought that chicken up to Plato and said, here, I have Plato's human being. And after that, Plato then did change his definition a little bit to not include talons or claws or scales. So this was the most prominent time, not the only time that Diogenes insulted Plato, but the most famous one. So this one is probably the most famous story of Diogenes. Alexander the Great wanted to meet Diogenes once because he had heard stories about the crazy man that lives in the wine jug. So he went to Diogenes once and asked him, what do you want? Like, I'll grant it for you. Like, I am fascinated by you. And he said, paraphrasing, you're in the way of my son, please move. And then Alexander, understandably was struck by this and went, he could get anything in the world that he wanted because of me. But he asked for me to move out of his son. And then he stated, if I were not Alexander, I wish I were Diogenes. So, cynics, they were, this is the Greek word, I cannot pronounce it, but it means dog-like. Cynics were very often insulted in just to their faces, but behind their backs or anything, called a dog because they lived on the streets. They lived for their urges. And Diogenes was known as the dog. And here on this slide, I have a picture of, that's actually Diogenes with his lamp. And a dog because he was the dog. There's a story of Diogenes where an elite called him a dog and threw food scraps or bones or something at him. And to spite him, he raised a leg and urinated on the scraps like a dog would. So in some point of his life, Diogenes was captured by pirates and sold into slavery in Corinth. Here, there's another strange story behind this one of he was put up for auction and he actually chose who he wanted to be sold to. He pointed at him and said, that man needs a master, sell him to me, which is a little strange because he picked his master and said his master needed a master and he would take that role. So, and then Diogenes actually ended up living with this family until his death in 323, I believe. His master was named Xenides, and he actually tutored the children, became a part of the family, and just lived in harmony with this family as a part of the family until his death. The way he died is unknown. They're not 100% sure on how it was. One story goes that he killed himself by suffocating by holding his breath. which I like to believe that might be how he have went, because that's a kind of the ultimate fu, like, I'm out. And then he had kind of grown to be loved by the Athenian people, so they buried him by the city gate, which he would have probably laughed at, because he once when he was asked, what do you want them to do with your body when you die, he said, throw me over the city gate and let the dogs eat me. So Diogenes definitely was a very interesting person, and he laid a lot of the foundations of cynicism that can be seen to this day. And here are my sources. Thank you.